Well, people in Saskatchewan are awaiting the results of toxicology reports after a fatal crash over the weekend that killed the captain of the Saskatchewan Roughriders football team. Authorities said that Dalke had been driving on the wrong side of the highway before the crash, that his vehicle was connected to a gas and dash earlier, in other words, buying gas and then leaving without paying. Alcohol and cannabis also found inside the SUV. The crash has left the community shaken, killing both Dalke and the other driver, 22-year-old Regina Mann. Okay, we're joined now by Evan Bray, who hosts a radio show that's heard across Saskatchewan on 980 CJME Regina and 650 CKOM Saskatoon. I hear you do your sound check. We can hear you perfectly there. So you had listeners who were, I guess, calling in to your program today. What were they saying?
Yeah, Ian, this is a really obviously it's a tough story that we're following, and it's one that's got some real complex emotion attached to it. When we first heard about the death of the Saskatchewan Roughrider Jayden Dalke, we didn't know any details about the car accident. And as you can imagine, in a province like Saskatchewan, where the riders are very beloved, followed by so many people, there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of sadness, and a lot of an outpouring of support for the Saskatchewan Roughriders and, of course, Dalke and his family. But what happened is we learned some details from the RCMP. You just talked about some of those details that paint a bit of a picture as to maybe what happened. Still don't have the complete story, but now there's lots of mixed emotions around this. Of course, still an outpouring of support and sympathy for both men that died in this car crash, but a lot of unanswered questions as to what actually caused the crash.
Yeah, so you're a former chief of the Regina Police Service, and I know police officers see way too many cases of either bad driving leading to fatalities or drunk driving leading to fatalities. Of course, we don't have the toxicology results here. It's too early for that, but I mean, we do know that Dalke, didn't pay for gas, that he was on the wrong way of a divided highway. Sounds like, he was the person who was culpable here, and the guy that he ran into and killed was doing absolutely nothing wrong. As a former police chief, what do you make of all of that?
Yeah, so I think you've hit on a couple of important points. Number one, he was going the wrong way on a highway, and a fatal collision happened that resulted in two people dying. So the fact that he was going the wrong way on the highway clearly is an indicator of a big part of why that accident was caused that way. What caused him to go the wrong way on the highway is one where, and this is the conversation we had on the Open Line talk show today, is until we know the toxicology reports, it's easy to try and draw conclusions without conclusively knowing the evidence. But I think we have to be careful. We have to let the investigation continue to the point that we know he had alcohol and cannabis in his vehicle, but had he consumed any of it? Did he have it in his system? Was that a contributing factor to this accident? Those are all important questions. I think we all, take impaired driving, whether it's by drug or alcohol, very seriously. But I still think it's a bit premature. As much as I think that the notion is a lot of people want to lean into that narrative. Until we know definitively, I think we just have to take the approach that right now, this is a serious tragedy. Two men are dead. And once we know the outcome of the investigation, without getting ahead of ourselves, we'll have a better idea of what caused that crash.
Yeah, so here's a complication. You have this beloved member of a, beloved team, the number one sports franchise in Saskatchewan, obviously the Roughriders. How do you properly memorialize his death? Because they have a game coming up, as you well know, on Thursday. How do you properly memorialize that when we don't know whether he was, maybe even criminally culpable in this case?
Right. You're right, Ian. I mean, we don't know those things. And I think, and this is me kind of surmising what we're going to see on Thursday night, but there will be some form of memoriam for Jayden Dalke for the role that he played with the Riders, both on and off the field. He was a leader in many ways in the community, and it's a tragic loss for the community, for the rider organization, and of course for his family and friends. But I also expect that the riders will respectfully pay tribute to the other man that died in that crash, a 22-year-old Regina man by the name of Bishma Rajiagru. He is a person that a lot of people in Regina knew. He was quite involved in the arts, in the music community, and there's an outpouring of support. There's a GoFundMe for him, and so I suspect that the riders will find a respectful way to pay respects and condolences to both men, their families, and the community in Thursday night's game.
I think, and again, you'll have some insight on this, it maybe puts the RCMP here too in a tough position, because you have two young men who have been killed. You have the tragedy to their families, no matter what exactly caused it. What if somebody were to say to you, it doesn't matter if Jayden Dalke was impaired or not. We don't need to know that. We should just let this thing rest. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that was actually a big topic of conversation on the show today, because the RCMP have released a lot of information, as you talked about, the direction of travel being wrong, alcohol and cannabis in the vehicle, the fact that there was an allegation that he pumped gas but didn't pay for gas. With all of that information released, I don't know how the RCMP cannot provide conclusive details to the community on what happened in this case. There may be some people that want to say, let it rest, but there's, of course, what happens in cases like this. In the absence of factual information, people try and fill in the blanks, and especially with social media, and those blanks can be terrible rumors, they can be misconceptions, they can be totally off topic, and that happened in the early stages of this investigation. To the credit of the RCMP, when they did get out with their news release, which took some time, but when they did, they provided a lot of information that dispelled the rumors and the misinformation that was out there and provided facts. It's my belief that the RCMP are going to have to close this loop and provide communication as to what the outcome of the investigation shows.
Yeah, well, let me finish by putting this out there. I wonder if it's even a step beyond that. What do you think of this? That there's an obligation on police, if it is somebody prominent even if it's somebody prominent in the community, even if it's a police officer or media hosts, that it's incumbent on the police to give out information like that, whether or not impairment was a factor, because it's just such an important issue.
Yeah, and I think we've seen, maybe not exact parallels, but we've seen that sort of thing happen, where incidents are reported when a high-profile person is involved, but if it was just an everyday Canadian, it might not have made headline news. That is pretty commonplace, I would suggest. So I do think that there is many times when people, whether you're in elected, hired into a higher public office or a figure, or if you're a role model in the community, and I would use professional athletes there as well. I think there is a responsibility that comes with that, and I think that responsibility carries through even in situations as tragic as this.
I need to listen to your show. You sound like you'd be a really good radio host. Evan Bray, the host of the Evan Bray Show in Saskatchewan. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thanks so much, Ian.
Let's continue on this theme, and we're joined by Steve Sullivan, CEO of Mad Canada. So, Steve, as you know, we don't know whether Dalke was under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and whatever the results are, two young men died in this collision. Does it matter whether or not Dalke was impaired?
Well, I think it will matter certainly to Bishma's family down the road. But I think right now you have two families who have lost sons, brothers, friends, partners. And so right now they're grieving. And I think right now that's the real main focus. So this is a tragic situation, whatever the cause of this crash was. And I think it's important to recognize that you have two families and many, many friends who are going through a really difficult time right now. And that's their focus. And I think we should all understand that.
Yeah, it is interesting, the information the RCMP has released to this point, because often they don't release a lot of information. And so it appears that Dalke did fill up his car with gas, his SUV, and then took off without paying. He almost certainly was going the wrong way on a divided highway. leading to this collision. And the RCMP went on to say there was alcohol and cannabis in the vehicle, which is interesting that they'd point that out, though the toxicology report is still a ways away. If it turns out that Dalke was impaired, what would you hope the public takes away from this story?
Well, I think, whenever there's a high-profile person, whether it's an athlete or an actor who's involved in an incident, certainly an incident that might be impaired driving, there's a lot of eyes on the situation, especially in the day of social media. A lot of people have opinions. It does allow for a community, and I think families and friends, to have conversations. This can actually be, if it is impaired, be a learning moment and a learning opportunity for a lot of us to reignite some of those conversations we've had with the young people in our lives, talk to our family and friends of, we know that people we all know, some of them might drive and not think about having a few beer or having a joint and driving. It's an opportunity for all of us to reflect on those in our own lives and maybe have conversations and start those conversations, which can be difficult at the best of times. But this might be a way into some of those conversations to talk to people and take a moment to reflect on what we can all do to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening.
Let's finish with this. Dalke was a key member of a beloved sports team in Saskatchewan. There is no bigger team than the Roughriders in that province. And, as a journalist, I feel like there probably was a time when details of a story like this, especially when, two people die, there's never going to be a trial, we might not find out some of the details that we're now waiting to find out. And I wonder your reflection on that. Have things changed? And, is it like, what do you feel about the transparency in this case?
Yeah, and I suspect if he wasn't a CFL player, wasn't a high-profile athlete, we wouldn't even know this much about the case, and that we might not be as curious to finding out what happens maybe in weeks or months when the test comes through. So, in many cases, people's names aren't even released. So there is an element to this being a high-profile case that this lends itself to much more interest. And again, I think that it's a double-edged sword, for the families, but also an opportunity for us to maybe learn from if there were mistakes made, decisions made that involved alcohol or drugs, that we can all take a moment to learn from this and remind us about the real serious risks of making those choices.
It is for sure a tragedy, no matter what those toxicology reports say. And as we wait for them, I know it's a very delicate thing to talk about. And Steve Sullivan, I really appreciate you chatting about this evening, because even without all the information there, I think it's an important case to be talking about. Steve Sullivan is the CEO of MAD Canada. Thank you.
Thank you.